Joining us right now by phone is Alex Newman. He is an international journalist, Liberty Sentinel. He's a contributor to Epoch Times. He's written books and contributes to other outlets as well. And he joins us now. Good morning to you, Mr. Alex Newman.
Thanks so much for having me.
We're very grateful to you. Praise be to Jesus. Let me just ask you, there's been, over the last couple of weeks, just an incredible amount of protests on a fairly significant scale all across the world. Sri Lanka, the Netherlands, France, China, Panama, Argentina, Australia, Italy, Kenya, Albania, Bulgaria, Macedonia, Germany, Afghanistan, and more. And I wonder if there's a common denominator between all of these. What say you, Alex Newman?
Well, I think there are several common denominators. One of the first and most obvious ones is that there is a plan called the Great Reset, and there are various different marketing terms that have been applied to this, Build Back Better and Green New Deal and New World Order. I mean, we've heard all the slogans before. And the issue is you can't build back better if you don't tear down first. And so I think what we're observing right now, what we're witnessing, it's most obvious, I think, in places like Sri Lanka and the Netherlands, but it will be more obvious in the rest of the world soon, is a controlled demolition of the previous systems to make way for what this global, I call it a predator class, hopes will be the new systems that will be then put into place. So we see right now, I think, an engineered war on farmers. That's, of course, the immediate cause of the protests in the Netherlands, some of the European countries. The war on farmers actually is, I think, what contributed to the overthrow of the government in Sri Lanka. I mean, they passed all these UN-supported green policies that basically decimated the food production in the agricultural sector. When people get hungry, they revolt. And I think one of the goals of this is to try to get people to revolt against their own national governments, really to try to knock down their own national systems and even their own nation states to make way for a new order. And I think that'll become much more apparent in the months ahead as this unrest and these protests spread.
I like the way you kind of put it earlier. We've heard all these slogans before, build back better instead of put it back the way you found it, right? That would be better. But you also, I've seen a couple of your reports and your contributions, especially on Epoch Times. The Buildeburg Meeting is another one of these where elites gather around World Economic Forum. And there's always some suspicion, but what's the reality here? How much of what these elites, when they gather, actually translates to what we feel, in our backyard and in our community? Or is it just what happens in third world countries or countries over the ocean? But here in America, how much of what they do affects us?
Well, I think there's two very easy mistakes to fall into. The first mistake is that they have no impact, that really these are just meetings that take place for the benefit of the people who attend them, and that there really are no implications for the rest of us. That is I think, transparently false view. The other mistake is to attribute all sorts of godlike powers to these people, which, of course, they don't possess. The other trap that people fall into is to assume that everything that moves, everything that happens is somehow caused by or desired by this predator class. Donald Trump labeled it the deep state. I think it's a good term that is kind of stuck. I wrote a whole book about it called Deep State, the Invisible Government Behind the Scenes. And yeah, Buildeburg is a critical part of it. Buildeburg is one cog in the machine. We have, of course, here in the United States, the Council on Foreign Relations. Its sister organization in Europe, the European Council on Foreign Relations. You've got the Chatham House, also known as the Royal Institute for International Affairs. Of course, the World Economic Forum is kind of a public-facing organization that's involved in this network. You've got then some of the more secretive organizations like the Skull and Bones Society at Yale. You've got the Bohemian Grove out in California. And, everybody recognizes that businessmen sometimes get together and decide to, fix their prices or conspire to rip off taxpayers or things like that. Everybody recognizes that those sorts of things happen. But I think a lot of us have fallen into this trap of not understanding that political leaders and business elites do the same thing. And I think the implications of these meetings and the plans of these people that are variously known as the deep state, the insiders, the establishment, whatever, they're very significant. And they have an agenda. We can pretty much discern what their agenda is, at least the version of it that they want us to hear. It's going to be a borderless world where we're all going to be happy, as the World Economic Forum puts it, we'll own nothing by 2030. So they have a plan. They have a vision that they want for us. And they're doing everything within their power to move us toward that vision. I still, of course, believe in the sovereignty of God, and so I think God will have the last word here. But I think it would be foolish of us to think that these people are not trying to direct affairs behind the scenes.
But, okay, so one of the things that gets me about this is, all right, we all like, or not all, but these guys apparently like money, power, and control. And even if I assume they're they're good, right? If I assume that they mean well, they're playing with people's lives. The people in Sri Lanka are starving. Why would they do that? Like, do they not care about these people, or they just figure it's an acceptable casualty for the greater good? I mean, what goes through their mind on these things?
I think when you get to the highest levels, they not only don't care, they view us with contempt. They call us things like useless eaters. They truly believe that there are too many of us. At its core, I believe this is diabolical. I mean, when you look at this contempt that there is for humanity, you see satanic, right? You see who is it that hates mankind so much that they would promote the abortion of tens of millions of people, that they would encourage the demolition of infrastructure that is required to support the lives of these people. And we've seen over and over throughout history that these types of people exist, but your average person struggles to understand it because they don't want to kill people. They don't want to enslave people. They just want to raise their family. You know, they may do quote-unquote small sins. They may lie. They may embezzle a little bit. They may even cheat on their spouse, but they certainly don't want to, put people in camps and enslave the planet. And so I think your average mind struggles to understand that people like this do exist and have existed throughout history and exist around the world. I mean, we see their manifestations all the time. Chairman Mao, Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin, Vladimir Lenin, Fidel Castro. I mean, over and over and over again, we see these types of people rising to the top of government systems and even corporate systems, and yet your average person still struggles to understand it. But I think it's very clear that at the highest levels, these people not only don't care, they have contempt for us, but certainly they have attracted an enormous number of dupes, or as Lenin used to call them, useful idiots, who truly believe that they're doing the right thing. And I was suckered into this as a child. I went to these elite international private schools where they were basically training up the managerial class for this global system they want to bring in. And we were taught that this was for everybody's benefit. It was going to lead to peace on earth because once there were no more nation states, there would be no more national armies, and then people would stop going to war. And, everything would be more fair and wealth would be properly redistributed. So there's a huge number of people, far more than the inner core, who do believe that this is the right thing for humanity, that this is going to produce positive results. But at the top, I think it's just pure hatred and contempt for people and for God and for everything that God has ordained.
I want to ask you about national sovereignty. As I said before the break, there seems to be just really bizarre behavior. If you're trying to give them the benefit of the doubt, right? I'm not trying to put on the conspiratorial hat here. I'm just trying to look at this from some common sense perspective. And it's bizarre what we see. Why would we, for instance, as an example, give any sort of oversight, veto power, or more control to the World Health Organization over what happens in my neighborhood or any neighborhood in America? Why would we do that? Why is that in our best interest?
Well, I think it self-evidently is not. We look at the World Health Organization, first and foremost, the first thing that becomes apparent is that it's a club for dictators and kleptocrats. Right? Not too long ago, just a few years ago, they elected the mass murdering dictatorship of Cuba to serve as the presidency of the World Health Assembly. You look at the current Director General of the World Health Organization, Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus, literally a former communist terrorist. He served on the Politburo of the Tigray People's Liberation Front, which was an ethno-Marxist terrorist group in Ethiopia, before he got promoted to serve as the right-hand man for literally a mass-murdering dictator. How did he end up at the helm of the World Health Organization? Well, Communist China, the mass-murdering dictatorship ruling over Communist China, which incidentally has murdered more human beings than any government in history, put him there. That's how he got there. And so the idea that this club of dictators and kleptocrats and gangsters could come up with better health policy than Americans, to me, is frankly ridiculous and insulting. And yet, this is what we're expected to believe the Biden administration believes. So I think when you boil it down, it comes down to two possible schools of thought. Either these people are total idiots, and they're destroying our country, they're destroying our economy, they're destroying our currency, they're destroying our energy systems and our life support systems by accident, or they're doing it on purpose. And those are your two options. And I think if you examine this from an objective point of view, it becomes very clear that this is not stupidity. And a great former Secretary of War of the United States, James Forrestal, was recorded to have said in a book that if this were merely stupidity, they would occasionally make a mistake in our favor. He was talking about how the U.S. State Department and our diplomats seem to consistently make these mistakes that benefited the Soviet Union and harmed the United States. And he said stupidity, consistency has never been the mark of stupidity. And I agree. When you see policy after policy after policy that tears down this country, that harms the American people, that undermines our national sovereignty, that undermines our constitutional system of government, eventually you see a pattern. And you have to say, look, this is not stupidity. I'm not saying that Biden is controlling all this. I mean, the poor guy has trouble reading his teleprompter. But the people who are running the policy, I think it's very clear, are doing this deliberately, and they don't have our best interests at heart.
Mr. Newman, thank you for your time here, by the way. I have a question here. You know, there seems to be... there's a nakedness to their plans too. I mean, you could read a lot of their documents, and they document really what they plan to do in the next 30 years. There's all kinds of things out there that you could read about what they plan and intend to do. Why do you think that is, and why do you think there's such a complacency to put out all of this information? Is it because people don't really react? They don't really know what to do in the face of such a struggle? What say you?
I think part of it is just apathy. They realize that most people just don't care until it affects them. And you're right. These people have been very, very transparent. I mean, almost a decade ago, David Rockefeller, who I think is one of the principal human architects of this, of course, he passed on a couple of years ago, but he wrote on page 405 of his autobiography, and this quote is almost word for word. He says, some even say that we being the Rockefeller family, are part of a secret cabal, is his term, working against the best interests of the United States with a group of internationalists. He said, conspiring to build a one-world political and economic order. And then he says, if that's the charge, I stand proud. I'm guilty and I'm proud of it. And so you consistently see this. It comes out in government documents. It comes out in their autobiographies. They talk about it in their speeches when they think nobody's paying attention. And I think they recognize that the vast majority of, not just the American people, this is true around the world, I mean, it's not just a ding on Americans, they just don't care. They're so worried about putting food on the table and getting the kids to soccer practice and watching, their favorite TV show at night, that there really is no time to be concerned about this. And I think that's why they're so bold in admitting some of these things so publicly.
You know, it's interesting. I was thinking while you're saying that it fascinates me because in one sense, they're trying to create this egalitarian society where everybody, you own nothing and you'll be happy. Everybody will be at the same point. But of course, that means everybody's going to be poor because you can't make everybody rich. But in the same coin, which is, I guess, a face of communism, is the communists are say, okay, we all should be, the people should own the means of production, but also we're going to have oligarchical rulers at the top. In the same way, these New World Order people in the same vein are preaching egalitarianism, are moving towards egalitarianism, yet we have this oligarchy, this cabal across the world. What exactly is their goal? It seems to be almost inconsistent, at least to the layperson looking at it. What say you?
Yeah, well, they have to frame this, of course, as something that would be beneficial to humanity. They can't run around and say, hey, guys, we want to enslave you. We want to take all your money. We want to brainwash your children. We want to take your freedoms. And, by the way, hand over those guns. That would not be very popular. And so they have to put a veneer of respectability and desirability on this. And I think that's the story of communism right there. The people at the top who've been promoting this, they didn't really believe that nonsense. They knew perfectly well there wasn't going to be any egalitarianism. What they were trying to build was a giant slave state where they would be the slave masters over the rest of the population. And I think that's what we're seeing again. But you have to put kind of a smiley face on it. And it even helps for the people who are getting sucked into it. It was much easier for people in the Soviet Union or for the people of Eastern Europe or the people of Canada, the people of Cuba or Mozambique or communist hellhole to submit if there was some sort of pretext for it because it was designed to improve conditions of the working class or some such nonsense. There has to be a pretext for people to be able to go along with it. But ultimately, I think it's self-evident that this is an evil agenda. It's also a new Tower of Babel. We're all going to get together. We're going to build this world structure. We're going to defy God, and we're going to be able to accomplish whatever we want. And, of course, that's not ultimately going to succeed. But I think that's what the elites, they really do view themselves, I think, as evolving into not just rulers of the planet, but gods. And they're saying this more and more frequently now with the transhuman agenda. I mean, some of the things that you hear these people talking about, they just sound absolutely crazy, and yet they're saying them in public.
Let's go back to the food. They're using food as a weapon here, and there are a lot of contributing factors that can make the food situation in the world a very scary thing. And just a couple of months from now, there is, of course, the conflict in Ukraine between Russia, which has now impacted their grain and fertilizers across the planet. Here in our own country, of course, we are having a drought in many places, fertilizer prices, diesel prices. In Texas, they're selling off cattle faster than they can possibly dream. They're trying to get rid of so much cattle because it's hot. They don't have the grass to feed them, and a lot of other problems. So we're facing a very big food crisis on planet Earth. And no, I'm not afraid of. I think I'm going to starve here in this country, but many other people could. What do you say about that, Alex Newman?
Yeah, I've been sounding the alarm about this for a few years. I think, again, what we're witnessing, like we started the program with here, was we're witnessing the controlled demolition of our food supply. And that takes a lot of planning. That takes a lot of deliberate effort because America is so unbelievably productive when it comes to food production. You really have to put a lot of effort into knocking down those systems. And we're seeing the same thing all over the world. I've been covering this story for 10 years. In Brazil, they were kicking the farmers off their land under the guise of giving it back to Indians. In South Africa, you have the former president, then president, singing in public about bring me my machine gun. We're going to go shoot all the farmers. What kind of people say this, right? In China, you've got the dictatorship herding hundreds of millions of peasants off of their land into these giant empty cities that they built. We see in the Netherlands, they're openly saying, we're going to shut down your farms. We're going to take your land. We'll give you some money, but we're going to shut down your farms. You all cannot keep farming because of nitrogen, because of global warming, because of whatever silly excuse they come up with. And we're seeing the same thing in the United States. Now, we've had David Beasley, the head of the World Food Program, and I wouldn't normally look to a UN agency for anything, much less guidance or truth, but this is the one American who leads a UN specialized agency. There's 15 of them. 5 of them are in the hands of communist China. But the one American there has for years now, since the beginning of the COVID crisis, been warning that this was going to produce massive global famine. He actually said a year and a half ago, this was going to lead to a famine of biblical proportions. Those are his words, where hundreds of millions of people would be at risk of starvation. So I think what we're seeing here is the deliberate destruction of our food systems for the same reason that Henry Kissinger argued in his 1974 National Security Memo 200 when he was serving as National Security Advisor. Food is an incredibly powerful weapon. Now, his National Security Memorandum, which was classified when it was written, it's now been declassified. Anybody can read this, National Security Memorandum 200. He called for using food as a weapon to coerce governments into imposing draconian population control policies on their people, sterilization, abortion, contraception, et cetera, et cetera. But the principle is the same. If people are hungry, you can get them to do, and you can get their governments to do things that they never would have done before. So, again, I think this is engineered. I think it would be prudent for people to pay attention and to start considering prudent precautions. But we have to recognize that this is being engineered. It's not going to be a surprise when they formally announce it, whether that be a few months or even a few years from now.
The hypocrisy is just terrible, too. They talk about a Green New Deal, but don't care a lick about what happens to sub-Saharan Africans who have to dig for those materials, let alone the immigrants coming across the border that are in debt to cartels who are making billions on drug and human trafficking. It's just incredible. I mean, the hypocrisy is just disgusting.
It is. It's and I see this hypocrisy every time I go to one of these UN summits. I've been going to these UN climate summits, which is kind of where the heart of the policy-making apparatus for this. People don't realize all these executive decrees from the Biden administration. These are all being done in compliance with these UN agreements that the U.S. government has signed on to over the years. And then the hypocrisy is so blatant, you almost can't believe what you're seeing. You have thousands of these global elites flying in on private jets and dining on steak and caviar, and then they get to the podium and they say, we need more people to ride their bikes because CO2 emissions are bad. You just flew in here on a private jet. What's wrong with you, man?
Yeah. With caviar also flown in on a private jet. All right, Alex Newman, God bless you. Thank you for your time today. We're very grateful to you. LibertySentinel.org is the website. Check it out. Alex, God bless you. God love you. Have a great day, sir.
God bless you, too. Thank you so much.
That's going to do it for hour number 1 of Catholic Drive Time. If you can hang out with us in the next hour, we'd love to have you. David L. Gray is going to be on to talk about Louisiana bishops embracing contraception. What? We'll talk about that coming up next. Otherwise, we'll see you back here tomorrow. God bless you. God love you. Have a great day.